I'm sorry. But I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate. We think too much and feel too little. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness. Without these qualities, life will be violent. And all will be lost. All will be lost. Do not despair. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die. Dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. Will return to the people. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world to do away with greed. Now let us fight to free the world, to fulfill that promise. Let us all unite.
Welcome, folks, to the Corporation Nation radio program. We got a special show tonight. I actually had a couple of emails over the years, actually quite a few, of people who are either pregnant, expecting, or have already had children. But for the most part, tonight's show is geared towards the expecting. We're going to call tonight's show What to Respect When Expecting, referring to, of course, the concept of not respecting persons. Now, why do we say this? So you got a wee babe in the oven. Congratulations. Now, you have a big decision coming ahead of you. Should you register your child as a debt slave to the United States Corporation, or should you attempt in every way possible to give your child a choice in his or her later life as to whether he or she wants to become, marked by that beast? Now, I want to remind people of a few words here before we introduce our guests. What is a nickname? Well, if we go to Webster's 1828 dictionary, the noun or legal function of that word is surname. A nickname, surname are basically the same thing. To call by a name of reproach. Are you going to call your child by the same name of reproach that you've been called all of your life? What is a nickname? It's a name given in contempt, derision or reproach, otherwise known as an opprobrious appellation, to call by such. What is an opprobrious appellation? Reproachful and contemptuous, scurrilous, blasted with infamy and despised, rendered hateful as an opprobrious name. And an appellation is an appeal. It's a name. An appellation is a name. Word by which a thing is called and known. So if a surname is an opprobrious appellation, and an appellation is the name of a thing, well, then you give your child a surname by rendering it, which means to surrender or give up. Well, guess what? You have just introduced your child as a person, as an artificial being. What is a surname? Coming from super and nomen. Nomen meaning name, again. An additional name, a name of appellation. Added to the baptismal or Christian name, which is the first name, as Daniel likes to call himself, Christian name, Daniel, and which becomes a family name. Oh, but it's a family name. It sounds so wonderful. No, folks. Surname is the corporate name of contempt given to a man to turn him into a little pod that's plugged into the matrix, to turn him into a copper-top battery, an artificial person. Surnames with us originally designated occupation, estate, place of residence, or some particular thing or event that related to the person. Like my surname, my name of reproach is Richardson, meaning, of course, son of Richard, and it's added to the original name. The Christian name, the name a person receives by baptism, in other words, by the ceremony of birth, as distinguished from the surname. In law, if you add a name, you're doing an addition. Do you want to do addition? It means a title annexed to a man's name to show his rank, occupation, or place of residence. Do you really want to add an addition in the form of a title, which in this case is the surname? Do you really want to do that to your child? Now, my guests tonight are my usual guests for Wednesdays and Thursdays, where we discuss such things. Christian named Daniel, who will also be with us tomorrow, and Freeman Burt, who's with us on Thursdays, finally coming together and meeting for the first time. And we're going to talk tonight about what you should do if you're expecting a child, and possibly what you can do if you've already done the do and done the deed and cursed your child with a blemish, with a mark, with a surname. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hi there, sir. Thank you for having me.
How's it going there, Clint?
Good. Well, so let's start off with Burt, because, Burt, I don't know how much you want to actually talk about your own personal situation, but you do have children, and you were able to, through a series of almost comical errors, somehow escape the hospital without assigning your child over to the state in the form of a birth certificate. And that is the question that's posed to me. How do I not allow my child to get a birth certificate? That's the first step. That's the first thing that, of course, is going to happen. So tell people about your experience in that regard.
Yeah, well, my main purpose in the going through the hospital and the whole ordeal was that I did not want my children to be tagged with a social security number. That was like my very main thing. And as I did a lot of research, I come to find out that the hospitals actually make money from, or make Federal Reserve notes or credit unions, whatever you call it, from the federal government, from the Social Security Department, just simply by providing the name of your baby through the paperwork that they give you. And then what I come to find out is that the form that they give you at the hospital, they ask you for the complete name of the baby, and then there's two little boxes that says, would you like a Social Security number, yes or no? Well, what I've come to find out by speaking with other people was that it doesn't matter what you check, yes or no, you will receive a Social Security number in about 2 to 3 weeks after you leave the hospital. So I had already made up my mind. And then what I come to find out that it is so easy to prevent the hospital from tagging your baby. Just simply do not give them a name. It's that easy. The nurses literally were following us out the doors as they were opening up and tapping me on the shoulder. Sir, do you have a name for the baby yet? And I'm like, no, sorry, we just don't. We just haven't made up our mind yet. And actually we did. So they gave us a hospital certificate of birth, which just simply had the baby as baby Aaron Goering, and that's it.
Aaron Goering being the last name.
Yeah.
The surname, which is again, so, and you've never had any attempts to assign them a number. You've never seen any evidence that the number was assigned anyway.
No, they have no name. Now, eventually, we did end up getting a birth certificate, and I'm now in the process of trying to revoke that birth certificate, and there were other personal reasons why we ended up getting it. But at the time, I didn't know as much as I do now. Sure.
Everybody's basically innocent in their missteps into the realm of evil. Basically, you can't really blame anybody, including yourself, for just the sheer ignorance that's taught to us. Amazingly, so.
Yeah, but I want you to know that they do have passports. I was able to get them that without a Social Security number.
Yeah. All right, guys, we'll be back. We'll talk to Daniel and get to the bottom of this.
First of all, let me take just a moment to thank you for allowing me back into your homes. If this is your first time with us, let me extend a personal invitation.
Let's build a happy little cloud. Let's build some happy little trees. There are no limits here. You start out by believing here.
We got Burt and Daniel on today. Burt's website is onlyfreemen.com. Daniel's YouTube website, hopefully they'll have a regular website soon, Christian Remedy and Law on YouTube for Daniel. Now, Daniel, I was just, I've got all these definitions in front of me. I just love the way they all come together. What is a name? Why would anybody look up what a name is? First of all, what is a noun? Well, a noun is a name. So every noun that you see in the dictionary is actually the name of something. It is the legal definition of something. Since legal is automatically not alive, it's referring to a thing. So a name, a sound or combination of sounds by which a thing is called material or immaterial. That is a noun. What is a name? Well, a name is that by which a thing is called a noun. A person. Remember, person, place, or thing? Those aren't real, you see. Assumed character of another, authority, behalf, part, as in the name of the people. Remember, people aren't real either. People are just a bunch of persons. None of it's real. Appearance only. So if you have a name, a surname specifically, it's for appearances only. So when you appear in court, of course you appear as the person, not as yourself. Sound only, not reality. That is a name, folks. A name is defined as not reality. My God. When a man speaks or acts in the name of another, which he does when he pretends to be a citizen, he does it by their authority or in their behalf. Well, there you go. You don't own that person. That person is owned by government. You're just participating by making an appearance as that person. You're literally a representation of government's person. It's a reputation. It's a character. That which is commonly said of a person as a good name, a bad name, renown, fame, honor, celebrity, eminence, praise, distinction, all the things that you should really be avoiding, to be perfectly frank, because they all have to do with ego. Another definition is to entitle. Well, aren't we not supposed to have classes and titles in this country? Name the designation of an individual person or of a firm or corporation. In law, interestingly, a man cannot have more than one Christian name. It's funny because you can have a lot of surnames because they are not real. They're not reality. So, Daniel, did you ever have children?
Yes. And I made the same mistakes that everybody else pretty much out there has. So I'm not gonna tell anybody a story that somehow I didn't fall prey to the same thing everybody else did. Even though raised from a very, very strong religious background, still at the same time, the knowledge that I was passed on from my parents did the same error. And my belief is that they just weren't reading. They weren't reading the code book properly that we've all been studying in the last while, knowing that there's something about that book that's not from this world that gives us the ammunition spiritually against doing things that seem to prey upon us when we walk in fiction. And so I've realized that what do you do when you've already stepped into the manure? And that's the problem on this. And I've done my utmost to look at it. You may want to look up the term, it's called Plead the Baby Act. It's in Black's Law. And what it's really kind of stating is that you really weren't in consent to be involved in something that actually could have affected you, possibly to the negative. So what happens is if fraud is involved, there's no limit, there's no statute of limitations on that. because fraud has no statute of limitations. Well, the surnames are fraud because there was an inducement to actually enter into something that was not really your property. And I just call that induced labor. They even do that with the women in the hospitals. They even induced labor in there on top of it. So when you're being enticed or induced or beguiled into using something that's not yours based on someone's intent to attach you or enjoin you to something that would not be beneficial to you, but beneficial to someone who has an ulterior motive, that's fraud. And so what do when you realize what fraud is? Well, you can get a really interesting definition on fraud. If you get there's a book that came out in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that was called Be Your Own Lawyer. I call it Be Your Own Liar. But in the book, it talked about fraud and says once you discover fraud, you have two options. You can either enforce the fraud once you've discovered it, or you can basically take yourself out of the fraud, and you'd have to, of course, not benefit from the fraud, because to totally get out of it, you have to hand back what's not yours. Now, that's going to be really difficult if most people have held their property, and many of the things they've already registered under that fictitious name. So what does someone do in that situation? Well, that's a big question. I leave that up to people. That's a moral conscious decision whether or not they want to continue with something that they would know that they've actually just registered into fraud. And
I just looked up the Baby Act. If you go to Black's Law 2nd edition, at least, online. What is the Baby Act? Or Baby Act, I should say. It's a plea of infancy. So you're actually, even though you're an adult, you're pleading, you're making a plea that says when whatever is at bar happened when you were an infant. So really you can't even be here because the name assigned at infancy was, is now what's happening. It's kind of a paradox almost. Plea of infancy interposed for the purpose of defeating an action upon a contract made while the person was a minor. And it's vulgarly called pleading the Baby Act and applied to the plea of statute of limitations. So that's interesting. I know you've mentioned that before. I hadn't really considered that before because really what you're saying is, hey, I can't be here because when I was made, when the person that I'm representing today was made, it was when I was a minor, so that cannot be attached to me. The contract is null and void. I'm pleading the Baby Act, basically.
And that's kind of like where the term the oligraph came in that we were in discussion of, which is basically a signature that was placed in advance on a contract or an instrument that you were never party to. And so most people receive their birth certificates from their parents, but there's no signature of the parent on there. Whoever is on there is the signing authority, and you really weren't party to that contract. So at the end of the day, it's almost like a signature written in advance for someone, and therefore it kind of relieves a little bit of a burden there for the moment in thought, because what we've been doing unknowingly is taking that instrument, using that to apply to become known as the one with the use of that surname by entering into the Social Security or the Social Insurance Program where you took that certificate and moved up the ladder. Though you never had proof you had authorization to have that surname, and in fact, when you're applying for the birth certificate, most of the application process puts you on the spot or whoever signed for it to get one.
And you carry it on through your whole life, basically never knowing that it was done in fraud. We'll be back, folks. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Corporation Nation. We're talking to Burt and Daniel. Daniel only goes by his Christian name. Daniel, I had one more quick question. Something I just realized as I was sort of listening to you there. You've said before that when you sign your name, when you're signing as the person with the surname, you're actually always acting in fraud. I could never figure out what you meant by this, but I think I finally do. You say you're signing for another. Well, I guess that would be true because you have two choices. Because you didn't sign for the name in the first place. The only person that signed was the informer, which was your mother or your father. Or you're signing on behalf of government's property, so it's not your property. It's not your. I mean, it doesn't represent you. You're using another name, which in turn to sign for someone else is actually illegal, isn't it?
Rating it's like an absconding debtor. The only problem was the absconding debtor were the pagan monarchies who were borrowing money, and they weren't going to pay the debts. They said, why don't we just give you all our peasant workers? We'll give you the titles that they operate under that they don't even know is not theirs, that we just give them under grant. They're indebted to us for the use of it, so we'll just give it to the bankers, and the bankers will have them register voluntarily into a program thinking that they have the use of it. So, but the interesting thing about it is you couldn't have entered into that program without having a certified signature of a government official. You could never vouch for who you are. So they have to give you a voucher, because you could go down the road all day long and get pulled over by public officials on the road, public officers. They're not going to believe who you say you are without a voucher. But funny enough, the voucher has someone else's signature on it, which would in itself kind of give you the indication that it's not your signature that could do it, but they certainly want you to sign after they arrest you or do something with you where you go and take it over. So what would happen if you put their signature down that's on the voucher?
When you say voucher,
to pay for any crime, duty, debt, or obligation that you've been induced to be involved with. It sounds like enforcing fraud against fraud.
So when you say voucher, what are you referring to?
I'm talking about the birth certificate, or what is called the token of value.
Okay.
Because it's not really who you are. It's kind of more like a counterfeit token of value.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Burt, going back to we've got an expectant mother, and we've got a whole population. The small population that perhaps listens to this show, reads my blog, knows about you, Burt, and you, Daniel. We've got our little population that now knows that this whole thing is fraud. Now, Burt, what are we supposed to do when we know there is fraud? What is the first? I mean, what are you supposed to do when you recognize fraud?
Well, I mean, even legally speaking, even within the system of the state, okay, once you realize that there is fraud, you are compelled to inform the proper authorities of the fraud, and you yourself must and you definitely cannot continue to benefit from the fraud, because if the fraud perpetrators are prosecuted, guess what? You're going to be prosecuted along with them. But just like Daniel was saying, the beauty of fraud is that the clock doesn't begin to tick until you realize that there was fraud. But especially when you plead the baby, right?
Right.
But once you know that there is fraud, you must act upon it. And one of the very basic things that you can do once you realize that there is fraud is begin to ask questions. The minute you begin to ask questions, you are creating a situation where you're letting the world know that, hey, there may be possible fraud here. Now, here's the really cool thing also. Most of agencies attempt to scare you into continuing to participate in fraud. That is also illegal.
So, do you think it would be, because it's always good, as we talk about, Bert, it's always good to have a sort of a one-up, to do things before the actual thing happens. If you get pulled over by a cop, you want to do as much as you can to make that cop or the city liable in court, if you have to go to court or whatever. You always want to set up everything. So would it be a good idea for, say, an expecting mother or father to actually do a letter, basically, before the child is born to both the hospital and to the registrar of the state or whoever it is that collects this information? Would it not be a good idea maybe to write a letter that says you recognize the fraud and you want to participate in it, and that you expect not to be harassed and not to be asked?
Well, I mean, that would work. Another thing, and I'm working on some of these things, and maybe Daniel and I can get together on this thing so we can collaborate it. But affidavits are very powerful, okay? But a lot of people put these affidavits together, and I've read some affidavits that are pages and pages and pages long. And the point of the affidavit is to enter a statement of fact. And the fact can be based on your belief, because in reality, one man's fact might be, different to somebody else. So if it's based on your belief of whatever God is to you, and you make the claim on this baby that is growing inside of you, that this baby is going to continue to be your property even after the baby is born, and anyone who wants to challenge, let them step forward. I mean, that would be one step. But the biggest thing, I think, for every mother is they must realize when they're pregnant, are they breeding for the state, or are they having a baby for themselves?
Yeah, and I guess we got to remember that, again, we go to the definition of people. And peopling is actually a verb. It's actually the act of basically to denizen somebody, to make them a citizen, is to incorporate a man into a person. That's what citizenship is, or denizenship. So we have to remember that peopling, when they wanted to people the nation of the United States, well, the 14th Amendment certainly did that, didn't it? But to people something is the same as putting cows on a farm. To put men in the form of persons incorporated into the corporate structure, you're peopling the government. You're peopling not the land per se, but you're peopling the jurisdiction of the government. So, that's an interesting thought, is to Daniel, do you know can you do an affidavit as a living man, even if you're already, if you still have your citizenship? Can you do an affidavit as a living, human being?
I think the question that comes in here, and there's a couple things involved. Number one, with what I know now, I probably would have had less contact with with hospitals. I mean, hospitals are founded on war.
Yeah, I don't know if people know that or not, but they're actually Red Cross. They're basically for prisoners of war. So, it doesn't matter what the purpose you're going to a hospital for. They are designated places for us, which we are basically prisoners of war. Remember, we are a military-occupied nation. I'd say all nations technically are under that type of military occupation. It's just called government.
So I think the problem is when someone's basically using the war hospital's services, it kind of makes it a little bit of a problem, because, as Burt was mentioning earlier, now that Burt and I know it's fraud, and then we go into the hospital knowing it's fraud, here's what the problem is. It's called lack of preparation, because the fact is we're going in to use somewhat of someone's services that's already deeming us to be in the fraud with them for whatever purpose they have, an ulterior motive at the end of the day, for you to be, to produce this child issue for the state kind of on the wrong side, on more the secular side, secularizing the child instead of it being spiritual. What happens, we're using their services and then saying we're not going to perform the state requirement to put, the name in full. They need your spirit given name in their dead body corporate surname. That's why it has to be in full.
Gotcha. All right.
Got nothing without it.
We'll be back, folks. Stay tuned.
Living in the street. Oh, there's a solution. Scientists have been battling to understand what this unappealing object is all about. What the object is all about.
Information in the form of energy streams in simultaneously through all of our sensory systems in the form of energy.
Here in the Corporation Nation, we're talking about the name. You know what a misnomer is, folks? Well, in law, a misnomer is something that you tell government when it mistakes your true name by referring to you as a person. If you don't want to be referred to as a person, then you tell them they've made a misnomer. It's a misnaming. Nomer refers to nomen, or nominative, pertaining to the name. Nomen is actually from the Roman clan name, what they called gens. Typical Roman name preceded by the other forms of name, and the cognomen, which was actually the surname. So this all goes back to the ancient system of pledging that was created in Rome, when they created the false sense of Christianity as a legal status by assigning surnames. So I guess Burt. Well, first of all, let me just say that, it very well may be that we as a society, we as a population of this United States cannot escape what we've been in. I mean, there's a lot of people that are trying. I'm trying. Daniel's certainly trying. Burt certainly trying. And we never know how free or how enslaved we are until the point where we are captured and thrown into jail and abused and all of that. So all we can do is try. The question is, can we set a future for our children? The theme of this show. Can we set a future for our children so that they were born free? In other words, they were born innocent and they stayed innocent of the name. They are not in the jurisdiction of government. They can follow all the rules and play the games, but they won't get in trouble for victimless crimes. They won't be put into debt. And yet they could perfectly function within a society of like minds, with no threat whatsoever to that government. Now, Burt, you said that you're in a kind of a predicament because you, after the fact, after the birth, when you escaped narrowly with your living, breathing kid, and did not assign the surname or fill out a birth certificate, but later on you did. Now, this presents kind of an interesting conundrum because if you're the one that filled out this certificate, you're the one, it would seem, that would have to renounce it. The child is innocent. All this, it is the baby when pleading the baby. So how the two of you, maybe you can explain this. How can you go about, because this would apply to other people as well, how do you go about, or what are you planning on doing to get rid of that certificate?
Well, I already started by, first of all, finding out where the birth certificate ends up. And the birth certificate goes to the Department of Health in your particular county, which is connected to the state, and then it ends up in the federal Department of Health and ends up basically in the District of Columbia. And there are systems already in place for you to do a name change, okay? And then there are also systems in place for you to make corrections to the birth certificate. Okay? And one of the ways to make corrections is by making it clear to the Department of Health that the name was misspelled. It was incorrectly spelled out. And then they will send you these forms and all these kind of things. And, of course, they're going to try to capitalize the name of the baby, and you're going to insist that it's misspelled. And eventually you're going to end up having to go before a judge to get this thing straightened out. And I haven't made it that far yet, but eventually I will. But there is a system for correcting that, and you have to begin by arguing that the spelling of the name was incorrect.
Well, so the idea then is to go into a court. But this wouldn't be. Would this be for yourself as well if you wanted to?
Well, the name on the birth certificate, and I already spoke with the people at the Department of Health, and the lady was all shocked when I told her, I said, well, you guys misspelled his name, and I said, you used all capital letters, and that's not how it's properly written. And she's like, well, that's the way our machines, our computers print it, and she kept trying to give me all this BS. And then she says, well, if you don't like the way it's spelled out like that, then the only thing to do is to void out the birth certificate. And I said, well, then I guess that's what I'll have to do. You mean you want to void out their birth certificate? Why would you want to do that? And she was all freaking out on me,
What office was this?
Department of Health.
For the state?
Yeah.
Which is basically the same thing as federal, technically. Well, that's interesting. So... I guess you could do it for yourself too, but let's focus on the child, of course. So the idea is to get it into court, so that you can so that you can argue that it's fraud. I mean, is that?
Well, the easiest approach seems to be to begin by arguing that there is a mistake in the spelling.
Sure.
They definitely have a venue for that.
That certainly gets the process rolling, but then what's the end result? What's the idea once you get it in front of a court and you're trying to basically dismiss the whole thing?
Yeah, well, what appears that is going to be the end result is that they are not going to write out the birth certificate the way you want it to be written, because like Daniel correctly says, this is their world, and you're not going to tell them how to operate their world. So The only thing they can do is void out the birth certificate, and you will not have one.
Well, do you have to go to court for that to happen?
Well, it doesn't seem like it should go to court, but if the Department of Health will not void it out for you, then you might have to push it
to
in front of the judge.
What do you think about that, Daniel, as a process?
Yeah, I mean, for say for the child, we'll just leave the child in the situation, whether he's of mature age now, the way we look at it, able to kind of make his own decisions. And there are some leeway in there based on different provinces and states that sometimes the child can apply on his own, even without the parent, for a certificate. So it would imply the fact he'd have some say. But I would feel it'd be easier on the part of the one who, say for instance, we're just saying Bert, myself, and you, we had a certificate or we were given one. We have the ability to come forward and say whether or not what our belief is at this moment. And that's one thing you still have the ability to do. The problem is if you stay in there with the use of the surname, they can prevent you from acting with the surname on your belief while you retain the surname. So in other words, you can believe everything you want, but while you got the surname, it's like a shackle that can hold you back from being able to operate with your belief. Now, if you get rid of the surname, in other words, you say, I'm not entitled to it, you send them a notice. And I always tell people, send something in good faith. Good faith means you had no intention to do something in bad faith. I believe the surname is bad faith. Fraud would be bad faith, I would say. And I believe because it's bad faith, it's capital punishment. And the Romans always executed people titled in all capitals because they didn't have lowercase letters when we go back. The original idea of the Roman alphabet was all capitals. Lowercase kind of came in later, that we would use as time went on as more an idea of proper spelling. But I just look at it that the Romans in their origin, when you registered anything into their system, you'll find corporations, everything else, they'll tell you to put everything in capital letters, and they'll even mention that you must use Roman letters because of the fact is that that's how the system is based in the civil. The civil goes back to the Roman Empire. So the capital system, I mean, I'm not saying I'm against what Burt's probably opening up something there, that if you could get them exposed somewhere, it'd be interesting to see what they would do in a court of law while you've got them when you're in front of a judge, and you could end it on the public record.
Yeah, because you'd actually be recognizing the fraud in court. So if the judge were to continue with the fraud or force you into fraud, wow, that's a pretty big statement right there. So that's interesting. We'll be back, folks, with more on what to respect, what expecting. Stay tuned.
Don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are men. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful. Let us use that power to make this life a wonderful adventure. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world to do away with greed. A world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Do not despair. The hate of men will pass and dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. Let us all unite.
Welcome back, folks. Here in the Corporation Nation radio program. My guest today, Freeman Burt from Colorado, and a Christian named Daniel from Christian Remedy and Law. That's the YouTube channel. If you haven't seen Daniel at his finest in his YouTube videos, you might want to check it out. There's some good stuff on there. He really lays it out. I won't say preaches, but he really lays it out, I'll tell you. Burt just had a good little epiphany, I think. When you're going to give birth to your child, where are you going to do it? Are you going to do it somewhere that's natural, that's healthy, that's beautiful, that's wonderful, or are you going to go to the delivery room? Well, what is the delivery room? Oh, well, guess what, folks? Delivery is, of course, a legal term. Let me read you Black's 4th edition definition of delivery. The act by which the res or substance thereof is placed within the actual or constructive possession or control of another. What constitutes delivery depends largely on the intent of the parties. It is not necessary that delivery should be by manual transfer. Delivery required in conveyance of personal chattels as against all but vendor is delivery in its natural sense. That is a change of possession. Now, let's go back to that first sentence because this is important. The act by which the res, R-E-S, or substance thereof is placed within the actual or constructive possession or control of another. So what does that word mean? Well, res is actually kind of a very interesting word because, of course, we find the word resurrect. We find all kinds of words that has res in it. So what does it mean? Res is Latin, and it's in the civil law. It's a thing, an object, like the name. So, will you deliver your child over with the name? Will you turn him into an object, a thing, in the delivery room? As a term of the law, this word res has a very wide and extensive signification, including not only things which are objects of property, but also such things that are not capable of individual ownership. In Old English law, it is said to have a general import comprehending both corporeal and incorporeal things of whatever kind, nature, or species. You see, you might very well be a spiritual being, but your person is not. You can be both, you see. By res, according to the modern civilians, is meant everything that may form an object of right, in opposition to persona, which is regarded as the subject of rights. Excuse me. It's a very long definition. We won't go there. But basically, when we deliver. When we give birth in a delivery room, where it literally means to deliver your child into a bonded servitude, basically. So you have a choice again, and that's what the show's about today. Now, Daniel and Burt, we kind of have a conundrum, a paradox almost, because Daniel, you said that if you do try to go and void the birth certificate, you're doing so as the person, because of course that was the person that created the birth certificate in the first place. So if you try to appear in order to get rid of your child's birth certificate, well, they might not let you because it's really not your person in the first place. The problem with that is you don't create the birth certificate as a man, so you can't really appear in court as a man. Court doesn't recognize men. It only recognizes persons. It adjudicates and administrates the affairs and estates and of persons, which are theirs. So it is kind of a funny conundrum, wouldn't you say? I mean, how else could you possibly do business in the form of getting rid of your birth certificate unless you're acting as the person to which that who created that birth certificate? And we're talking about, of course, getting rid of your child's birth certificate. What say ye?
Well, you're right about that. If you're appearing in the court, you're kind of showing up as the person that claimed whatever it was in the beginning. So it's kind of a strange situation. Second of all, to understand with the listeners, the word court leads to the word cohort, which is C-O-H-O-R-T. Now, that's why you kind of open up that gate to go and speak up in the microphone. You kind of cross the bar. You're kind of getting into that area, that enclosed space, which a court is. And cohort's not a good word. And so you're kind of like in company that leads to the Roman military association, as you're getting into Roman military terms, a band of soldiers. So it's cohort is a conspirator or an accomplice, a subgroup sharing a common factor in a substantial survey, in a statistical survey. So you're sharing something in common in there just by showing up. So you're saying you are part of that common surname. So I wouldn't probably doing it by corporate. I'm not going to tell anybody not to, because I'm just saying when you're in, you might as well turn over every stone. And that's where the problem of fear is coming with a lot of people. They're just not doing things. And I at least I give people like Burt credit that they're actually doing something, because most people are waiting. They're not doing something. And they need to do their due diligence. So from my end, I did a little bit of a simpler conclusion on this the other day. And I think Burt and I both know that we filled out a statement and we were listed as informants, which means there was a criminal act. We were saying that we were entitled to something that was not ours. And that's probably why it's a criminal act, and that's why we're informants. And I can relate back to the fact why Judas was the informant on Jesus because he said he was part of their world, yet Jesus rebutted that statement by saying he wasn't part of their world. His kingdom was not of their world. So was he in or was he not? And now I'm beginning to understand the Christian name not being part of the secular side or the Roman world, which is the surname. So what would I do to get out of this? Well, why don't I just say, pretty simply, I, Daniel, that's unalienable, that's who you are, that's the real name, am not entitled to the surname or any benefits of it. Well, then I've just retracted the statement. In one sense, I can do it even though it was done against me as a child by parents that didn't know, but I still have the ability to say where I am at the moment. They were misled. A mere belief can misrepresent a fact. So they didn't realize that the surname they weren't entitled to, so their mere belief misrepresented the fact, the real fact that their given name was theirs, but the surname was not something they could place or entitle to the child. But they wrote down that they were. And I think that's what created the tort or the action. And then that made us the debtor. So
makes sense.
All we have to do is retract the statement, but you got to be careful how you retract that statement because you can't use the full name to retract the statement. You can only use what's yours and retract.
Yeah, that's the conundrum, isn't it? All right, folks, we'll be back.
Is this real? Or is this just right? The world is like a ride. You think it's real? It's a ride. We can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice between fear and love. The world is like a ride. You think it's real? It's a ride. We can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice between fear and love. Life goes up and down, round and round. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored. Up and down, round and round, and it's very loud. Don't worry, don't be afraid. It's just a ride. We can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice between fear and love.
Welcome back. And this is a very interesting show. And I get what you were saying there towards the end there, Daniel, but it was more in reference to your own estate, your own person, your own certificate, your own person. But when we're talking about the certificate that someone has already done for their own child, then in that case, wouldn't you have to change that in the same way that you created it, which was as an artificial person, which was as a citizen, basically?
What really exposes the evidence of the fraud is you require, from my understanding, pretty much worldwide, wherever this birth certificate system exists, which is pretty much everywhere, you require someone who's supposed to know you for 2 years to guarantee you to be someone who can even apply to get it. So it appears you would have to have someone who says, I fictitiously know someone who's operating in the fiction using the name, but because I've known him for 2 years, that's good enough as long as they're a public fiction. So in other words, you need a public official or someone who qualifies as a guarantor in the system, operating what is considered to be in the public interest, who could say, oh, I've known him operating in the public interest for at least 2 years. Now he qualifies to go get a certificate. So I went through the question, what happens if someone didn't know anybody? Well, then he couldn't get in. Maybe that's the best thing that could ever happen.
Yeah. Or to be born in a cab, maybe, would be the next best thing.
Well, it's called stateless. Because what would really happen is, this is what's happened in a number of countries. There are people that, even though they're born on the soil in some countries, such as Brunei, you can't get citizenship just because you're born there. You had to have some kind of lineage linked to people registered in their system as citizens to have citizenship. So there are many people that are considered stateless in those places. They can't get passports. They don't benefit from what the rest of the nation may have, at least by implication, the opportunity to, get. Well,
I hate to be the bearer of bad clandestine news, but we have the same thing in America. The concept of natural-born citizenship here is more a concept of commonality, the vulgar common people, the Gentiles, whereas, our rulers very much have a lineage, have a genealogy that they can show their relations. This is why all of our presidents are cousins of the queens and kings of England. This is why Obama is the first cousin of Anne Boleyn. This is why, there is definitely a genealogical privilege in this nation. It's just very hidden from the people. All your corporate heads and CEOs, all these very wealthy people, all these actors are very, very much part of this, what I refer to from the Bible as this synagogue of Satan. I'm sorry. And they are the ones, and I feel like this country was founded to benefit those people, not the common people, because the common people couldn't vote. They weren't the people back then. We weren't the people back then. This nation was created with secret statuses and privileges based on blood, and no one's ever going to change that thought in my head, because I've done so much research on it and I understand the nuances of it. And you can go read all my work on that if you want. But back to the subject at hand, because really what we're talking about by the birth certificate is a very, very low class. I mean, people believe citizenship is a high form of status, a high form of class, but in fact it's the lowest form. And really what we're doing when we're having a child and we're delivering it, as we discussed, we're putting it into the lowest possible class of people, which again is a way of taking away all the power of the individual, putting it into the people, again, the Gentiles or the goy. So Burt, have you had any problems, or did you have any problems with the fact that when you left the hospital, their children didn't have birth certificates? Are they still able to go to school? I mean, a lot of people, I think, are afraid of this whole thing, afraid to keep their children in the natural realm just because they won't get benefits and they won't get privileges and they won't get statuses, and in fact they're giving up the highest status of all to take upon themselves a citizenship, the lowest status. What have you had any issues with that? Oh, Burt, do we still have you? Burt, I think you might be muted. Well, all right. Apparently, okay, there you are. Did you hear the question?
I heard the question. My computer is acting up. My children, they do have birth certificates. What they don't have is social security numbers. Okay, now here's the part that I really want people to think about. What we're talking about here is being part of a machine or not. Now, if you want to completely ignore the machine, you don't have to do it. But if at some point in your life you cross paths with the machine, and the machine takes your fingerprints, for example, and runs it through its system, and a name comes up with your fingerprint, they're now going to try to prove that you are the thing that is attached to that name. So it is important that anything associated to your body is basically reclassified into a different status. In the legal system, everything is about a status. And in a political system, everything is about status. So whatever your status happens to be is going to determine the degree to which you are going to be discriminated against or not. So you need to communicate with the machine if you do want to go over at some later point in your life. And remember, the machine doesn't care anything about, you believing in God, not believing in God, you disagreeing with your system. It doesn't care about that. It only cares about you pushing the correct buttons, and then the machine will act accordingly.
Well, this is the perfect allegory that I always tell people, go rewatch the Matrix movie. This is exactly what it's about. It's about being a citizen when you're plugged in and not being a citizen when you're not. There is no spoon means there is no law. When you're inside this Matrix and you're not plugged in, it's all happening around you, but it's not actually real. It doesn't affect you. It doesn't have jurisdiction over you. It doesn't have power over you. You're the only one that can walk around and go between the laws. Now, unfortunately, the agents, the police, all the protectors of that law, the enforcement arm of the Matrix is always there to ensure that you are not free, that you are always plugged in, and that makes it very difficult. But it's the perfect allegory for exactly what we're talking about. The Matrix is an allegory for the straw man. We'll be back, folks. Stay tuned.
Hi, neighbor. Welcome again to this neighborhood. I'd like to show you something. You know what this is? Maybe if I press this button. There are so many things to learn about in this world. And so many people who can help us learn. And so many people who can help us learn. Did you ever grow anything in the garden of your mind? In the garden of your mind. You can grow ideas in the garden of your mind.
Well, boys, let's sum this up. Let me hear your individual comments or answers on this. I'm an expectant mother. There's plenty of expectant mothers out there. What should I do? I probably will have my baby in a hospital. It's I dare say it's a safe place to have a baby, but whatever. What do I do? How do I go about ensuring that my baby is going to be born innocent and stay innocent, at least for as long as I can do it? And then what are the steps to take afterwards to ensure that stays? And I guess the questions that people are going to really have is, okay, so what happens when they're 4 or 5 years old and you want to start enrolling them in school? Are you going to be able to? You're not going to get in trouble if you don't, because they're not citizens. And you can homeschool, but what if you want to put them in school? I don't know why anybody would, but what there's all these questions I think that people have. So let's start with Burt. What say ye, my friend? How do you? You obviously misstepped and went for the birth certificates, but what's the deal?
Well, I mean, the first thing is, of course, determine who you're giving birth to yourself, to your family, or to the state. Okay, if it's not for the state, then you need to protect that baby and protect yourself. And like I said, it's very easy when you go to the hospital. Just simply do not give them the name. Do not sign any of their forms that involve any kind of a name for the baby. But pretty much, if you do not give them a name of the baby, they cannot proceed.
And,
they cannot
and is that because, as far as I understand it, in order to have a citizen, you have to have both the lawful name and the legal? You have to have the surname combined with the Christian name. You can't have, you have to have both in order for it to be a binding thing.
Yeah, you gotta have a first and last name in order to be able to have a legal name. In order for them to be able to give you, the Social Security number and then to process the birth certificate. Now, once you leave the hospital, one thing that you can do is have your baby in your particular church. Then you're going to have witnesses who are going to sign the baptism certificate saying that this baby, in fact, was born on this land. I mean, and there's different ways to identify the land. Never, 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 ever identify the land as a county. A county is a political subdivision. So never say that you live in a county. Okay? So there's still a lot more details that we will not be able to cover completely here. But as the baby grows and you yourself grow, there's a lot of things that you can do. Another thing I'm exploring is, and you and I spoke about this before, is what is a true passport? A true passport would be a deed to land, something that says that you own a piece of land on this bigger piece of soil that they call the nation. That is better than a birth certificate. The deed, as landowners, who's going to deny them anything? But remember, the public school is a service. For who? For those who are unable to teach themselves. For those people who are incompetent, who need to be taught by the state. Those are the ones that go begging for public school.
All right. Daniel. Daniel, do we have you? Oh, my goodness. Well, we'll see if we can get him back. I hate it when that happens. So, Burt, right now, are your kids in school?
Yeah, and actually, last year I was having them do part-time, and it's funny how I just went to the principal, told him this is what I'm going to do, this is how many hours he's going to come to school, blah, 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 and he's like, okay, fine. They already know me in school, and I guess they didn't want to argue with me, so nobody did. This year my son went full-time, and I think next year he's going to go part-time again, and we're going to try to step it down so that we'll eventually have him completely being taught in school, because now that he's going into 4th grade, the level of indoctrination is just going up dramatically.
Well,
I'm constantly having to reteach him.
Common Core, you've got to, it's funny you say that. You have to reteach them. You have to tell them to forget what they've learned. Daniel, do we have you back?
Yep.
All right. So what say ye? I mean, what is your advice for people, obviously, that, again, pregnant, going to have a child, how do you avoid this whole boondoggle of personhood and citizenship and everything?
Well, I mean, the key thing, I think the key thing to remember is if they're attaching themselves to a claim and they're in there, that's going to be the biggest problem. Like if we're talking about basically children about to occur into the system and the parents are fully engaged in there, they got a major problem, because it's kind of like this, I don't want to use that word dishonorable, but it's kind of like even in fraud. Fraud's not fraud when you're participating. It's just considered to be what it is. Mm-hmm. It's just like you're in the movie and you're supposed to act and perform for what it is. So therefore, the feudal lord owns your child. In fact, he even owns your woman. He just doesn't sleep with her anymore according to the modern laws. But the feudal lord used to have the right to sleep with the maiden on the marriage night. So I know it's a pretty creepy system, but that system is really the origin of that surname and its pagan background, and therefore all I can say is that if you're going to use the hospital, you're going to be definitely into a situation. It'd be a lot easier if the parents had done some prep beforehand and started to look at, okay, what am I going to do if I'm fully participating in there? If they could, kind of lean out their participation to an extent and start to unravel how they're attached in there, because all the credit they have, everything they're using is based on that surname that belongs to someone else that they're paying homage to. And so I'm just saying, to an extent, there's one thing you have to see is that one thing they cannot demand you, as Burt said, they cannot demand you to put the given name to the child because that's ultra-virus. The corporation or Caesar can only claim what is his, and therefore all he's got control over, or the state has control over, is the state name, which is the surname. That's state property, not the given name. The given name is unalienable. It's not theirs. But the problem is the parents are participating in it, and it's kind of implied that they would put that in. So what the state's saying is, oh, don't worry, the given name, it's a belief, and you can believe in that. That's great. But as long as you don't act on it.
Well, it's interesting because
the state name shackles that.
Basically, what we're saying here is that there's going to be a level of persecution. If you're doing this, you're doing it because you know it's right. You recognize the fraud. You're morally engaged to not participate in the fraud. And you're certainly morally obligated not to throw your child into a state of servitude, subjection. So for this purpose, the corporation that wishes you to do that is going to persecute you. You're going to have trouble. You're going to have demands put on you that you're going to have to rebut. You're going to be persecuted because guess what? Whether you want to call yourself Christian or non-Christian or whatever you want to deem yourself, you're still following the path laid out for the Christian, and they're going to be persecuted. That's the nature of, and I'm not talking about the religious doctrinal corporate churches. I'm talking about what's in the Bible, what it tells you, how to not respect persons, not respect government, not respect religions, not respect any of those persons, those corporations. I'll tell you what, guys, we got a few phone calls. See if we can get through these. Kathy in Florida. Kathy, welcome to the show.
Hello?
Do we have Kathy?
Oh, it's Catherine.
Welcome to the show.
I asked you before, with everything you actually kind of answered some of my questions, but at the end of the day, if I choose to have a home birth and I don't file anything like that, then what would that mean for the future of the child?
Well, and that's a great question. We'll come back with that right after the break.
Derivatives, quantitative easing, trade imbalances, recession, low GDP, nations close to collapsing, and subprime loans, foreclosed homes, and people's taxes spent to bail out. All right, folks,
we are back here in the Corporation Nation. Special thanks to Daniel and Burt today for joining me. Kathy, I believe your question is basically one we've tried to cover, and I know it's a difficult concept, which is basically, how do I get benefits for my baby or my child? How do I include my child in society? How do I do all these? Well, we can only, I guess, technically show and explain what all these, statuses are. And the only way to be free or to be a free man, male or female, is to not have any status. Or, in other words, to have the highest status, which is no status at all. So, what is best for your child? Well, if you think that contracting your child into ignorance and servitude is best, just so that they can have a meager Social Security check when they get old, well, that's perfectly fine. I think the point that we'd like to make is that your child can join the United States at any time because he is considered a natural-born citizen according to the state. So at age 18, there'd be no problem. He can join. He can become a subject to the masters if he wants to. And I think it's much more important that we should teach our children what this citizenship is, this incorporation of man, and give them a choice rather than force them into it and basically put them into a situation of complete ignorance.
Well, here's a question that everybody needs to answer. Can the state exist without you? And can you exist without the state? Remember, the state is nothing more than a parasite. They produce nothing. So, can you live without them?
So the state cannot live without the persons that a tyrant without subjects is no tyrant at all, I guess. Daniel, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good. I think that's a really good question that people need to ask, because this is kind of soul searching. What we're running into, as we mentioned on a previous show, a lot of times people are asking us, how do we survive a fire by staying inside the burning house? And I just say maybe it's better just to leave the burning house. And that fears most people, because they're fearing the unknown. It's like the guy in the jail, he's afraid to be free.
Yeah.
So he never fits back in, because he's been told when he can urinate, when he can eat, when he can sleep. He's never known anything else. So he's almost, to an extent, an animal that's been domesticated or imprinted from its normal, wild, natural, being. So this manufactured artificial system has created a society that does not know how to function without being connected to it, to a large extent. And I think that's where the fear comes in. But another thing, too, is you have to understand that system requires us to be part of it in order for it to function. So it requires consent. But if you're not going to be in there, what is the reason why you won't be in there? And I think that's the thing. So for me, I would say that someone must be prepared that, no, you're not going to be part of the public interest in that sense. So you're not part of people pooling into the tax interest, and therefore, no, your child could not be enrolled in public school. And the good question is, would you want them involved with the cattle?
Yeah, it's really a matter of temptation, isn't it? I mean, when we're talking, how do you get people into the system? You tempt them with benefits and privileges, and you really don't disclose to them everything that their obligations and requirements are, which, is basically to die for your country, die for your nation that enslaves you. Kathy, is that there's three perspectives.
Well, the other thing is, okay, let's say that I don't file anything, whatnot, and I try to free myself. At the end of the day, I don't own any land. How am I going to make a living? How am I going to survive when it is the way it is?
Well, that's, again, we're not sitting here telling people to just go out and abandon everything, although I guess we are, because the word abandon literally refers to the abandoning of the name, abandoning of government. But, that is one of those what if questions that cannot be answered. That is and I hate to say this, and I don't mean any offense by it, but that is exactly the kind of question that any child or slave would ask. Fear of the unknown, basically. And that's, there's no one that can answer that for you but yourself, really. I mean, I would very much like to start a support group of people who, of like minds and like people who wish to form some kind of, I hate to use the word community anymore, but, some form of support group for people who don't want to use money anymore, don't want to participate in this system. But for now, I guess we're all taking the first step together, I guess is the truth. So anyway, it's not an easy question. I mean, there is no answer except, how do you know? What did they say in The Matrix? It's going to work because no one's ever done it before. Well, I mean, that's unfortunately there's no good solid answer. Thanks for the call, Kathy. Let's go to George in Massachusetts. George, welcome to the show.
Well, hello there. It is all about status, and it's all about nexus. And you gentlemen are right on. And what the lady was expressing, I think, is what all of us are.
Yeah, easier said than done, right?
It's a transition, yeah. And we're all children, and it's learned helplessness. That's what we've got right now. We've got all learned helplessness. We're all attached to our devices and our devices and our vices, and moving out of that is going to be it's going to take some growing up. So I totally agree with what you're saying. I guess as you transition, you might get arrested, and you might find yourself in a jail or a court. And I was curious as how you use status and instead of entering into the limited liability of the system, how you maintain total personal responsibility. How do you handle these nexuses where they entrap you into their court?
Sure, it's interesting because the court admits over and over, all the dictionaries say the same thing. The case law says they can't administrate you unless you have a name, and that's why we're so focused on the name today. But Burt, the question is posed: what do you do? This is another what if. What if they round me up? They're going to do that whether you're a citizen or not.
Well, here's the problem: is that the system has not just simply made everybody basically a parasite on the parasite. Okay. They have made us into dependent things. And in order to accomplish that efficiently, they have managed to tear down the family. Okay? By ourselves, we are helpless. I keep telling people, you cannot fight this fight by yourself. You need witnesses to go to court. You need financial support. You need all kinds of support. So in order to maintain freedom, you have to have a family. You cannot do it by yourself. Period.
All right, George, thanks for the call. Let's get one last quick call in. Let's go to David in California. Sorry we're out of time, David, but please.
Okay.
David?
Yeah, I thought said you were out of time. Okay.
Well, we're almost.
Okay. The thing with, Burt, I think, was speaking about county. I'm not talking about children or anything now. We're starting a Republic's county up here in Siskiyou County to get completely out of the corporation nation. Not just the state of Jefferson. We're talking about farther than that. But when he said the word county, what did you say, Burt, about county? I was curious about what you said.
That it's a body politic. It's a subdivision of the state and a subdivision of Washington, D.C.
So we're calling it Republic of Jefferson. We're not even calling it a county, so maybe we're all right with that. But we should be watch out if we use that word county then, right?
Yeah, definitely, because the county... Oh, they say it's of the people, but the people aren't you. You got to understand that the people are your artificial representation of you. So, of the people really is it's a joke on us. Thanks, guys, for joining me today. Call Burt or contact him. Onlyfreemen.com and Christian Remedy and Law. We'll see Daniel tomorrow as well. Thanks, guys.